Sharp Chat. Sharp Chat.
In some contexts, max Q refers to when an aerospace vehicle reaches maximum dynamic pressure. But for barbershoppers, max Q refers to when a quartet reaches maximum dynamic entertainment. And we are excited today to have our 2007 international champions, Max Q, on the show. Welcome, Max Q.
Bless us all.
Tony is a loser and it's plain to see he can't win without Joe Connolly. Greg is a loser and his dad was clear. He said don't come home without gold this year. Jeff's not a loser, he's a real cool guy. When you ask him, he's happy to tell you why. Terry is a loser.
Wait, I think it's Harry.
Harry is a loser.
Jerry?
Jerry is a loser.
No! It's Gary Lewis. This hurts me deeply. I'm sorry, Perry.
Bless us all. God bless us all.
Good to have you all with us today. Thank you for taking your time to come and share some of the story behind Max Q. And Tony, I'd like to begin with you. Would you tell us, how did this quartet get its start?
It was kind of random as I remember it, but we were going to have a little bit of a tag singing session. As I remember it, in Portland, Oregon, if I'm not mistaken, we talked about doing this little tag session with me, Greg, and Jeff, because Jeff and I had been doing some tags, and I was like, dude, you need to do lead on some stuff, and we were, I don't even remember how we were brainstorming baritones, but I was like, Gary Lewis is the guy that we need to do some tags with. And we ended up randomly singing some tags. I want to say like maybe at AIC Afterglow or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
That's what it was.
And from there, wheels just really started turning. We just had a great time singing some, banging some stuff out. Jeff and Gary really meshed well. I mean, very quickly from just a core coloring of sound, on the with the bass clef. It was fabulous. And then, we just started kind of, I had known Jeff and Greg, through many, many years of association with just being in and out of Dallas and the acoustics and the vocal majority and everything else. So I was good friends with them. And obviously I had sung with Gary before, but I don't know that Gary we knew each other, but I don't know that we had spent a lot of time with one another. So really it just kind of was like, after that time, we were like, why don't we just get together and hang out for a weekend, do some fun singing? And we really called it that. Let's just do some fun singing and see how this goes. And if I'm not mistaken, we spent like a September weekend together or something like that in 2002. And the rest was history. It just kind of came to be. And we found out that there was way more likeness about us, even though there was, I'll throw it out there, 10 years difference between the two sets of us. I'm not sure how we're positioned on the screen, but on my particular screen, the younger of the 10-year span is on one side, and then the older. But it was pretty crazy. That there were a lot more personal connection points between us. And I remember that first weekend, we all loved to eat, we all loved sports, we loved our families. There were so many and it was big picture stuff, but we just really seemed to click and have a great time together. And then on top of that, we really enjoyed singing with each other. So I think that's kind of a loose way of how it, again, kind of just happened very organically and naturally, actually.
Great. And I think you also mentioned something to the Heralds, to our chorus a couple of weeks ago, about a learning track you heard that kind of also impressed you. Is that right?
Absolutely. Basically, before it was that international, before the O2 convention, the Jim Clancy was directing the AIC chorus, and one of the songs that they did, and actually all the learning media then that the AIC got, was created by Jeff and Greg, because they did all the rehearsal media. And I remember There was one passage in the American Armed Forces medley that they did. It was the second ta-ta-ta section that leads into this high Chinese 7. Da 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 wop, ba-da, boop, bop. And this awesome 7 chord. And I mean, I just kept going back and hearing it for the variety of reasons. Jeff was on lead and bass in that on that learning track. Greg was on baritone and tenor. And I remember Gary and I talking, and it was just like, no, we have to sing with these two people. We have to sing with these two people that did this thing. And then that's kind of how that all started spinning, that we ended up kind of meeting together for this little tag session in Portland. No doubt.
That's awesome.
No doubt. Gary and I kind of commiserated to beginning, and then Jeff and Greg were like, well, we need a baritone. I was like, I've been thinking about this guy named Gary. I think he would do a great job. Really, Gary,
awesome.
but he's saying, because he was like, Gary sang tenor in platinum, and I'm like, Gary's a lyric baritone. He is going to warm you like you've never been warmed before.
Oh.
Well, that's awesome. Now, Jeff, Tony mentioned a moment ago that there is a little bit of an age disparity here, and it had been quite a long time since you had been in a competitive quartet. So when this idea first came up, what intrigued you about sort of jumping back into a competitive quartet environment?
Yeah, Shane, I've thought that was done for me, really. I really had many blessings with acoustics, and that was such an important group for me and that quartet. And I thought, hey, gosh, been lucky to win twice. Not, what a privilege, what an honor to be able to share that with the guys and along. It just, I guess, when you stop looking for stuff, maybe sometimes it falls right into your lap. And I think Greg's mentioned this before, but I've always been so lucky just to be around so many talented people. But Max Q is its own beast and its own animal. It's so unique in so many ways. It really enabled me to get out of the way of myself in a lot of ways. Self-imposed or not, I was kind of the leader of those past 2 quartets. Really, it was kind of structured that way. And Max Q, it was just worry about yourself, and really just, I learned so much from Tony and Greg and Gary. I mean, I can't tell you, some of the stories I really can't tell you, but actually, it was such a refreshing, free. It enabled me to be free, and I really, if you look at the sounds of acoustics, the style compared to Max Q, it really is, A to Z almost, and it really enabled me to just be such a better musician, much better ensemble singer, more relaxed on stage. And that's just the singing part of it. The brotherhood, these guys are my brothers in my family. And if I talk about it too much more, I'll get really emotional. Oh man, they've been there for me so many times. And that's what barbershop is, man. People, it was all about conquering. It was all about the medal. It was all about the victory. And Max Q became a family and is a family. Yeah. We talk quite a bit. We'll go for stretches. We don't talk at all. And all of a sudden, there's these flurry of texts and things. And it's enriched my life, Shane, in ways that I'll never be able to explain, fairly. And it's given me 3 more family members to lean on and to enrich my life. So it's the best musical experience I've ever had.
That's fantastic.
And I'm like Greg and like Gary and Tony, we sing with professional musicians day in, day out almost. And it really, this has been the most enriching musical group, family that I've ever been a part of. So I'm just the luckiest guy in the world, man.
That's fantastic. Now, Gary, you had done some fill-in work for Keepsake on bass. And then, of course, you sang tenor for Platinum. Had you ever done baritone in a quartet before?
Well, that's such a great lead into what Jeff had said, because, before I got to sing with Jeff, I sang actually with Jeff's younger brother, Justin, in my college quartet, The Real Deal. And Jeff was like, this elusive superstar character in my life because he went to the same university that I did, and so since he was a little older than me, I didn't get to work with him, but his legacy was there,
Mm-hmm.
and his little brother brought that to life. And so I was singing with Justin, who's a great singer in his own right, but Justin had an opportunity to have a career in Texas, and he was the baritone of The Real Deal. So we ended up having me switch to the baritone part in The Real Deal, and we got another tenor, a great singer by the name of Sean Oliver. And so I did get to sing baritone. My first ever international as a competitor in a quartet was on the baritone part with the Real Deal. We entered the open contest and came in 38th place in '96 in Salt Lake City. And
Top
it was
40,
right,
baby.
yeah, it
I've
was
been there. I've been there, buddy. I know what
it
you're
was
talking about.
man, it was something. I was so nervous, man. I thought my heart was gonna pump outside my chest. Just crossing that international stage. It's something that it's just so that experience is really hard to describe when it's built up in your mind for so long of what it's gonna be like. And those are the days before you would, whatever, take a beta blocker or something to help not have your heart beat out of your chest. But I know Tony still doesn't do it, but anyway, so I'm not even sure what the question was anymore.
Well, just had you ever sung baritone? So you had before,
yeah,
and then
yeah, I had.
also, did you sing? I'm trying to get the chronology right. You sang with the Voices for a while. Did
I
you?
did.
Did you sing the baritone part with them as well?
Yeah, I was initially hired. So I moved to Florida in the spring of '96, and that was just before I got the opportunity to sing with Keepsake. And Tony and I were friends,
Gotcha.
but we weren't in a quartet together. And so there's a lot more to that story and how Tony came to Disney and then how Platinum formed out of Keepsake. And it's a really long story, but I was hired as a baritone / second tenor with Voices, but gosh, 95% of the singing I did was in the baritone slot.
Gotcha. Now, Greg, as Max Q is about to get started, you had sung, of course, in some excellent quartets, the Class of the '80s and Gatsby. And then also you had been a fill-in tenor for the Dealer's Choice. And of course, a string of gold medals on the chorus contest stage. But what was it like for you to step into a quartet with guys who had all won championships previously, some multiple times? Did you feel more excitement, more pressure? What were your feelings getting into a quartet at this level?
It's a good question. I some of all of it. I think there we definitely had a lot of self-induced, self-inflicted pressure that we put on ourselves early. And I think there were high expectations for this quartet. And we had high expectations, and I think our focus early was, I wouldn't say on the wrong things, but maybe on the things that ultimately became ancillary things and not the priorities. So, I mean, it was very exciting for me, but to sing with friends, I didn't know Gary all that well. I was one of those that thought of Gary as a tenor and a bass.
Right.
And of course, he and I became bookends and dear friends, but I certainly knew Jeff and Tony very well. So it was comfortable individually, but I mean, like for me, I think that Max Q was like an explosion in slow motion as far as it was a highly intense environment. There were highly intense friendships. And it seems like maybe even though we're a decade apart, 2 and 2, that I feel like during the Max Q years, we were all going through a lot of different personal things and that were influencing the quartet. And personally, my kind of view of the universe is one thing that happens to everybody that it happens to for different reasons, but for reasons that are important, whether it's to learn something or enjoy something or whatever. And I felt like that was the kind of the case with Max Q. We came together at the times we did for all of us to learn and take away different things that made us better human beings, better musicians. It prepared me for a role that I never otherwise would have been prepared for. I can tell you that.
Gotcha. Great. Well, speaking of those expectations, Tony, going into the 2004 international contest, the quartet had the highest prelim score going in. Although, if you go back and look, only by a fraction of a percentage point were you all in first place. But I think the expectations were far beyond what those preliminary scores would have led people to think. I know that me, as a relatively new barbershopper, I just sort of had this feeling. I think a lot of people did, that Max Q was going to storm in to Louisville and run away with the championship. As you all were preparing for that contest, how were you managing those expectations, which, whether real or perceived, certainly were out there?
Well, obviously we didn't manage them all that well. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the barbershop world is pretty small, and that I do think that there was a perception about the quartet that was on stage way before we were there to sing, and I don't know that any one of the four of us talked about that much, really. I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's not like we were ever the most polished quartet of all time. Even when we were spending time, it's not that we weren't diligent about knowing our stuff, but because we were a long distance quartet and really
Right.
one of the first ones. I mean,
Mhm.
as I'm remembering that time in those, the early 2000s, there weren't long distance quartets. I mean, it wasn't something that happened regularly. And then actually after Max Q, it became a more regular thing. But so we didn't have the luxury of being together week in, week out, or even having, let's say, 4 weeks in a row of once a night together, or anything like that. Now we did, when we did have our time, we'd come in for recording weekends or for rehearsal weekends. I mean, we were pretty diligent about our time together, especially
Sure.
in those early years. We found ways, as we were together more, to rehearse less and enjoy wings and other food items together, much more of the time. But I think going into 04, I knew that we all felt like we had something. I mean,
Mhm.
from a musical standpoint, from a that was a given. I don't know that all four, and I think from a material standpoint, even, we felt like we had something special too.
Right.
We were doing unique material, but there is that personality thing that has to just kind of unfold, as you're together, and you're not only together in rehearsal and with stuff, but as you are on stage, and the reception, so to speak, of things. So it was I don't know that any one of us thought that we were going to walk into Louisville and win. I don't think that there was ever a time that we felt like we were going to walk in and win. I don't remember that being a personal goal, and it could be because I'm just really old and I forgot. But and that was a lot of years ago. But I think there was definitely a pressure. I think, and it was a bit of a pressure cooker probably that we put on ourselves, as Greg just mentioned. A little bit of kind of self-induced. We need to be so good, and I've got to be a great lead, and and I've got to be enough to balance out for Jeff, and Gary's going from tenor to baritone, and he's got something to prove in that, and and maybe even along the way, Jeff, having not been on the contest stage in 14 years or whatever. There was probably some of that. I'm not sure how much it contributed to our failing necessarily, because I mean, we walked in and we were second. I mean, there was nothing wrong with that, and I thought we had really good rounds in Louisville, and did some good singing along the way. But I do think that there was probably a public perception that was one that we wouldn't have been able to live up to no matter what. And then from there, things just kind of, thankfully had a path of their own. So.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I wanted to ask you from your perspective, which is really quite unique, because you won a quartet championship in 1984, and then 6 years later you competed, and the first time out, acoustics wins. So then you compete again in 2004. So it has essentially been over 20 years since you've been in a quartet contest in which your quartet doesn't win. So I was curious, especially from your point of view, what was that experience like in Louisville and after?
Well, essentially, you're telling me I'm old, Shane. I think that's really what we're getting down to. uh, it really, you know what? I was, I kind of coincide with what Tony just mentioned. We really, um, we, we were just trying to do the best we could do. If you look at, and you, not to steal previous thunder here for maybe some of your questions, but Max Q evolved a tremendous amount from our first competition to our last competition. And we were not the quartet we were going to be in that first go around or that second go around or that third go around. It took all three of those, if you will, baptism by fire to really identify what Max Q was from an entertainment standpoint, from a sound standpoint, from an energy standpoint. But the pressures were there. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I wanted to win. I mean, you know, that's how we're all kind of put together, I think. And I was definitely a lot more edgy back in those days. And it really was, you know, each quartet has its own, you know, history and lifetime. And I just felt so privileged. I felt like the pressures from the outside did get to me a little bit. They did. You know, I don't try to show that, but I think it took a while just for us to kind of homogenize, if you will, and to become who we were. And how fortunate is that? Greg says this a lot. You know, things happen for a reason. And you know, for instance, if we would have won in '06, you know, when Vocal Spectrum very deservedly beat us by 6 points, then we would have never had Here's to the Winners. It never would have happened. That moment never would have been on stage. And yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question here, Shane, but I felt like this quartet did what it was supposed to do on the time frame it was supposed to do it, and I couldn't be more happy with that. Was I pleased with not winning? No, especially when we got beat by like 900 points, but that really was. I think it was a pretty hefty margin, like 180 or something.
It was it was. I looked it up. Yeah, that was about what the margin was in 2004. I got to do my research here.
Well, I mean, but one thing just to dovetail on that though, what was really evident about our quartet in the years that we, especially those '04 and '05 for me, was that when we went to do a show, we just had the greatest time. And there was something about singing on a show stage that was very different than any competition stage that we performed on throughout the entire time that we were together as a quartet. Even in Denver when we won, which was great, but you know, I should say our prelims and international '07 was definitely different, but we just had such a great time on stage together. We did stupid stuff and we would still keep singing. I mean, we would be messing around for 3 minutes of a song and then come back and smack a tag. And that was just something. And we found, you know, we just didn't know at the time as we were doing shows in '04 and even '03 and then '05. It's like, oh, we got to figure out a way to get this, you know, in front of everybody. But that obviously we weren't ready for that in '04 and even '05 when we did stuff. So
gotcha. Gary, I seem to remember that you and I have in common, and maybe others here too. I feel like I remember talking to you about this, that you're a big fan of the movies like Waiting for Guffman and Best in Show and A Mighty Wind. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. Rest in peace, Ron Albertson.
Yes.
We lost Fred Willard last week.
Well, that's what kind of made me think about this. I watched them all last week because he passed away, and I couldn't help but get struck at how similar the dynamics are from subculture to subculture. That within, for those who haven't watched those movies, they're sort of parodies, but they're very good-hearted parodies of things like the dog show circuit and the folk music circuit and the community theater world. And yet within these incredibly small subcultures, there can still be so much pressure. And I think about that all the time Barbershop would be the perfect vehicle for another one of those kinds of movies for sure. And so you're in a quartet that has these expectations, rightly or wrongly. 2004, you finished second. In 2005, you come back. The quartet is edged out again. You come back a third time in 2006, and the quartet finishes second. As Jeff said, by 6 points, not 6 percentage points, 6 raw total points. Was there any thought in your mind, and everybody else can, of course, contribute to this, but was there any thought that, wow, maybe this just isn't ever going to happen?
Well, I think Tony might be the one to answer that one, because I remember, what's really amazing is that, and I will get to answer your question, was that, along our path, we were approached by a film crew that wanted to make a documentary. And that film became American Harmony, and it's just the most amazing thing that our story is immortalized in the way that they chose to edit it down. But still, there's so much there to, and as an educator, I've showed that to my students, and so I've seen it many times.
Nice product placement in the background there, by the way.
Oh
you
yeah,
got the poster in the back.
there's a story behind that poster, but. What was the question again, Shane?
Just was there the feeling that after finishing second 2 times closely, once very closely, that maybe this just wasn't going to happen?
Yeah, well, I think every one of us would have a different answer. As a competitor and being as close as we were, I mean, I really thought in the deepness of my heart that we had done it in 06. And you go back afterwards and you digest all the data, and every time you digest it, you come up with an answer that just makes you feel bad for thinking this way about some individual, be it a judge or another competitor. And so that's a pretty dark place to go. But I thought for sure that we had done it in 06. So for me, it just gave me more resolve to do what we did in 06, just at a higher level. And the thing that we did differently in 06 was when we did. Was that the first Little Pal, guys? Was it 06? And that was the song, I think, that really gave us the opportunity to be seen as something other than this, these monsters or behemoth barbershoppers, and allowed the audience, to see us as people and as parents.
Little Pal, bless you. Little Pal.
And so and Tony said, being on shows, we wanted to try and capture more of that. So that's exactly what we did. And we just took it a lot more seriously, and we rehearsed more than we ever did going into 07. And we actually brought a coat. We flew Clay Hine out to Dallas, and he worked with us on Here's the Losers.
Here's to those who never made it here, but try no matter what. And here's to those who'd love to move up just one place. Then we'd stand tall. Here's to the losers. Oh, bless us. Oh, bless us all. Jeff, Tony.
And sure, I wish we had won in 06, but I'm so glad that we got a chance to do what we did in 07, because it was the thrill of a lifetime to get to do that Saturday night set.
Well, speaking of that song, what was the genesis of that? Greg, do you remember where did the idea for the Here's to the Losers come from, and how was that song put together?
I think it was all just the genius of Clay. Tony, I knew you were. Why don't you answer that? I know you were talking to Clay at that time. He had done a couple things already for us.
Yeah, it's interesting, and not to take any thunder from Greg in any way, but both in 06, our closer for the finals was a song called "The Best Man." And then in 07, we had Here's to the Losers. Yes, it was Clay, but both of those songs actually came specifically from the lips of Tim Brooks, whom I was chatting with in a conversation with Clay. I think Clay and Tim had been talking I'm I know that Best Man was, but I'm pretty positive that Here's the Losers also was kind of a triangle conversation with Tim Brooks, and just randomly, and then definitely, as Greg just said,
It was.
it metamorphosized from there, and really worked from there with Clay's genius and how it was gonna, kind of roll and everything else. But those two things, I think, were just these random songs that Tim, and I mean Tim, who is a fan of everybody on the call, and when I think of the quartet, was also kind of just like, intuitively as a friend, just going, what is this nut you guys have to crack to, to really not just solving the riddle of who is Max Q, but who is Max Q, so that the audience can love on you in the same way, kind of a thing. So, and yeah, I mean, Gary said it best there. I think we found a dramatic hold, if you will, an emotional hold with Little Pal, and then to be able to swing the other way, with the self-deprecating humor that we had, and just being able to have fun in a way that was so very public,
Yeah.
for all of us. I think that swing of emotion really helped us, and from a competitive standpoint.
Hey, Shane, one thing I would add to that is I would completely agree with what they're saying about Little Pal was just kind of a moment, a pivot moment for us in '06. But I also think we were in the background working on the For the Children CD.
Doe, a deer, a female deer, Ray, a drop of golden sun, me, a name I call myself, far, a long way to run, so a needle.
And it was that 2-disc set, and it was really kind of became a passion project. And I think it took us out of this contest,
Right.
world and universe, and put us into a different place. And I think that project and the Little Pal experience in '06, which is what allowed us to really, I think, reveal ourselves authentically, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, Greg, sorry, real quick, Shane, the '05, we come off of that second place. I mean, to team on that, Greg, For the Children saved our quartet, because we sat in a hotel room in September of '05 after Salt Lake City, and the four of us were going, why are we doing this? Because at the time we all had really young children. We were away from our families for 36 hours, but we were like, my gosh, why are we doing this at all? We love singing with each other. We love making music, but what's the real purpose for us to just take time away from our families? We work
Right.
all week, and we show up to a show and we want to do our best, but we're, a little beaten down, from work week and everything else, not feeling our best. And on top of that, we're away from our young families, and For the Children was a conversation that happened, again, for some reason, I think it was in Providence, Rhode Island, in a hotel, and that was the show weekend in September of '05. And the talk of that project, it's just funny how that all started to spin in such a different way, because that project, which I think is going to be, serve in time for us as our legacy project for sure, but it really saved our quartet from a standpoint of the competitive side, even because it gave us something that we were all able to sit back and go, oh, this is why we're together. And from that, it gave us other inspiration to be able to actually bring to the contest stage. I mean, I remember Clay saying to me, he's like, what do you want to sing about? What's something that you love that you just want to sing about? And I was like, my kids. I mean, my son and my daughter, that's it. And he was like, okay. And from there, things just kind of cycled. So.
It is so odd that over the course of doing Chop Chat, we've had a chance to talk to several championship quartets, and almost the constant theme of all championship quartets is they only won when winning was no longer the most central driving force in the quartet. And it's so interesting to hear that story about the For the Children CD project, which is, it's the kind of recording that any barbershopper could recommend to anybody. They don't have to love barbershop music. They don't have to even really love a cappella music. They just have to have kids they love and know the power of music. And it's just so neat to hear how that project had such an impact on the quartet. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you've been enjoying our conversation with Max Q, and we are excited to bring you part 2 of our conversation with this phenomenal.
Hun, don't you hear the trombone moan, and just listen to the saxophone. Just hear the clarinet and flute, cornet and jazzing with a mute. I just want to throw my cares away when I hear them play now.